Good morning, everyone. Sorry if there is convenience confusion because I'm managing the system and it looks like the system is slow here on my end. So I hope you are feeling well, good, and nice this morning here in Toronto, afternoon in Europe, and evening in India, night in Australia. We welcome everyone on this session here, and I hope you'll enjoy learning a little more about digital ethics and about the contribution of Center for Excellence, Empathy, and Equity. What the center does is initiate conversations, and we have been doing this conversation series. This is the 8th series of topics related to digital inequities and digital inequities in culture, digital inequities in access for the people who have no access or less access to internet and the digital technology. The purpose of this session is to educate and update ourselves about what's happening about digital ethics. For example, the big companies and big corporations have good business, and how far are they corporate socially responsible? How far are they ethically and morally doing their duties? This is a kind of reflection that we want to have. We are not critical about what is happening in their own atmosphere and in their buildings, but we want to think and see how safe is the environment, how safe is this for the have-nots in the global scenario. So I welcome you all for this session. Today we have a series of good speakers and thought leaders. The first speaker will be Yusuf Mansouri. He comes from Australia and he has a tons of knowledge about cyber security and cyber capacities to manage the networks. Yusuf Mansouri is the Council Tech CEO. He is a tech startup with a deep sense of purpose to play a role in society by creating value for others. As I know, he has tons of years of experience. That is over 30 years of experience in digital technology and leadership. I was a colleague with him, and I know his skills and his capabilities of managing not only local networks and local systems. He's a global leader, and he has been managing global systems in different scenarios and different countries. The next speaker with us is Steve Abram. Steve Abram is our favorite and a thought leader in Canada and North America. He has been responsible in many of these companies in North America as the information industry leader, and he is a prolific writer and speaker. He has authored numerous articles, books, and presentations on topics such as library advocacy, technology, and innovation. He's also the founder of the popular blog Stephen Lighthouse, which covers trends and developments in the library and information world. The next speaker with us is Claudia Pagliari, an interdisciplinary researcher and educator who directs global health program at the University of Edinburgh's Medical School. She has a long-standing interest in digital ethics and good governance, stemming from her participation in a wide variety of studies involving innovations such as big data, social media, artificial intelligence, and apps. We have two more speakers, and I'll take 2 more minutes to talk about them. The next speaker would be Professor Juliana Akidi from Nigeria. She is a university librarian, Alex Federal University in Nigeria. Alex and Akidi, Professor Akidi, are you there? Hello? The next speaker in this list is Kelly Rowan. Kelly is the digital archivist librarian in the Digital Collections Center at Florida International University Libraries. She serves as electronic thesis and dissertation librarian, publishing all university theses and dissertations. She also works closely with both internal FIU partners and external community partners to create and host digital collections in FIU's digital depository. She holds master's degree in music, religious studies, and library information science. Our last speaker of the conference workshop leader is Yusuf Mansouri again, and he will give us the insights of cybersecurity that are in his workshop presentation. I welcome Yusuf Mansouri to have his opening speech.
Hello, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon,
You're
evening, and
muted.
night.
One second. How do I unmute it?
Can you hear me?
Abdurrahman?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
we
can
can
hear
hear
me.
you.
Yeah. Okay, so I've been asked to open the seminar. The seminar is about making empathy, equity, and diversity relevant to digital ethics. Welcome all of you. Great background and experience. So, Dr. Tahir has already mentioned them by name, so I won't go into that details. The seminar is about, uh, making empathy, equity, and diversity relevant to digital ethics. So, how are empathy, equity, and diversity relevant to technology and more specifically digital ethics? How values or moral principles are related to corporate businesses in terms of corporate social responsibilities? As you know, technology is an undeniable dominating our daily life, but the little inequities on the rise took a newer shape and form in the recent era of pandemic, emerging recession, and ongoing global health crisis. Furthermore, lockdown and distancing created the biggest challenge for the have-nots, the vulnerables, and the like. Social justice calls for a newer conversation in this emerging new next normal. In short, empathy, equity, and diversity, um, raise the urgent questions and demand answers about the corporate social responsibility in terms of ethical obligations, in infrastructural concepts, contexts, and so on, in designing, building, and launching digital products. And how does a society find a coherent ethical framework to ensure that the corporates will do better? In this seminar, we will continue our conversation series to unbox social and digital inequities. Furthermore, we will explore the topics of digital ethics and gaps in inclusion, belonging, and diversity. This program covers an exciting and diverse range of themes with great speakers and a workshop at the end and some learning opportunities, sharing, connecting with others. I think the names have already been mentioned, so I'm not going to repeat the names. Perhaps I'll just mention the topics that, so there are four key topics or four key areas of discussion today. So the first one is ensuring an ethical AI. That includes ChatGPT by Mr. Stephen Abraham. The second is about preserving health equity in a digitalized society and what are the regional and global implications. And that is by Dr. Claudia Pagliari. Then there is a panel discussion on digital ethics in information industry. Panelists would be Dr. Juliana Obiageri Akidi and and Kelly Rowan from Florida International University Digital Archives. And the session will be moderated by Abdurrahman Said, who is a senior application production support. And finally, we'll talk about cybersecurity. It's a very, very deep topic, but I'll try to be brief. And yeah, I'll have a presentation on that. Thank you, and welcome again.
Thank you, Yusuf. Now I welcome Steve Abraham to please deliver his key speech on this topic of ensuring an ethical AI, including Chat GPT.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. Thank you, Yusuf and Mohammed. It's an interesting time, isn't it?
Yes.
And so I just want to start off by saying, let's think about excellence and empathy and equity and AI in terms of AI, not in terms of Chat GPT. Chat GPT is a product from OpenAI, and there are hundreds of other AI interventions. We have been using AI for almost 20 years. When you go on Amazon and it recommends a book to you, that is the early stages of AI. So it isn't new. What has changed is it's not just a prediction engine of what you want to, what you may buy in the commercial context. It is turned into a transformative engine. And so what I want us to take us on a journey of today is how do we, over the next 10 minutes, 10, 15 minutes, look at AI and evaluate it as the professionals we are. So are we testing it right? What's the lens we need to use for these AI tools? And then what are my big points? So there I am. I run a company that helps companies and institutions and social institutions mainly to deal with change and strategy. And there's what I was like at the end of November when I first started playing with ChatGPT. I instantly saw that this was a platform shift. This was a major change that not only has the potential, but will change everything, just like Google did, and just like the web did, and just like the internet did. And of course, the internet, the web, and Google are three different things. This is a different thing. It's not the search curve that we dealt with when we moved from Gopher to Excite to Yahoo to Google. So before we talk about equity in AI, we must first understand AI. And we must look at it through multiple lenses. So it has the potential to thoroughly help us with cybersecurity, which Yusuf will be talking about later. It also has the potential, when not done right, to exclude people or provide greater access. So we need to use our lenses, our equity lenses, to judge the morality of some of the tools. We also need to look at the feedstocks. What was AI pre-trained on? So GPT means generalized, pre-trained database. So it wasn't stored like old databases. It was trained to understand and learn. And this is what machine learning is at its simplest stake. So if it's only learned on the widest internet without guardrails in it around, we know that the web is full of things that may offend some of our value systems or leave out certain things. So AI and the Human Genome Database is a huge opportunity. The genetic structures, which we all share, are amazing, except that the Human Genome Project is dominated by Western white populations and does not have the diversity in it that it needs to look at pools of genetic conditions that may happen in other population groups. So we've been through this before and so many times. When something innovative arrives, we try to understand it through the lenses of the old ways. And I'm seeing people do this now with AI. They're trying to use it as a search engine. So let's look at what happened in the past. We had OPACs, and they were great. And we could do known item retrieval on it. Stick in a couple of words. We basically just learned to type in words into fields. Remember fields? And then we might have learned truncation. And then we got citation-only databases like ERIC and the GPO and a lot of the original Medline. Oh, and so those citation-only databases continued to allow us to retrieve in an OPAC kind of way records that matched our inquiries. But then we got databases with full text, and we needed to leap from field searching to Boolean searching because we started to get the problem of too much information. Now, when have we had, what is happening currently around AI? Too much information. So Bing has been attached to the web now. So it no longer has the September 2021 learning deadline where it stopped learning. However, the way it's attached isn't attached currently in a learning modality. It's attached in a retrieval modality attached to a learned database. So it's much like ourselves. Okay, it's learned a certain artificial natural intelligence, and then it can update itself. So then after we went to online databases, we started getting the internet with the first generation of it, Archie, Gopher, Veronica, and had to find servers and where to search. And then we had to search inside those servers. Then we moved on to directory search, where we were able to aggregate all those servers. And that was the strength of Yahoo. Then we could federate it for specialized searches, and we're still in a Boolean mode until Google hit. What did we see when Google hit? We saw librarians trying to use Boolean operators in Google. And Google disabled the Boolean operators in your search statements. So they went to advanced Google. And so they thought Google Advanced made them professionals. And too many of them didn't understand that none of the algorithmic learning and ranking was in Google Advanced. Now we're in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and ChatGPT kind of clones. And I see people trying to make it a search, trying to search it to get an answer instead of create a transformative response. This is a workflow tool, not a search tool, which is why Bing and Google will continue to exist as tools, but the writing it does is informed by its training, and its training is based with a few guardrails they put in to try and avoid racism and porn and difficult topics that shouldn't be in our general workflow. So we've gone from searching metadata only to searching with fields, to finding a place to look, to searching the web, to find and transform, create. So when we're doing our evaluation lens on the ethics and equity of this kind of tool, we're looking at it as a workflow tool that creates content, non-copyrighted content under the US rules, and Canada's adopted it. I don't know about your countries, but it will they will probably lead in that space as to whether the content from ChatGPT is labeled with an author. We also have had them all agree to, all of the major ChatGPT and its clones agree to watermark visuals, so that when the stock market had a major drop last week because somebody used an AI image generator to show the Pentagon on fire, we need to have the tools to understand that. So within terms of misinformation and disinformation and using this with elections worldwide, the opportunity for bad players to create images and videos and real voice, like it sounds like the voice of the person saying it, we have some serious personal privacy, personal response, misinformation, disinformation, equity, and rules to put in place. And of course, the CEO of OpenAI has asked for something to be put in place, and there's some initiatives moving along on that space. Luckily, this should be a global task, much like this webinar, not a national task. In the current, just a personal opinion, in the current situation in the US and the ability of Congress to understand AI and be literate in this space, it needs to be outsourced to what in Canada we would call a Royal Society or Royal Commission to investigate it with experts, and not, the largest donors to the US Congress are publishers. So here we go, looking at going from the card catalog to retrieval to AI machine learning, where it gives answers to inquiries through chat and engineered prompts to write a natural response. A prompt is different than a search statement. A search statement is different than known item retrieval, and retrieval is different than, and record retrieval is different than full text. So each time we go through one of these plateau changes, we need to ask ourselves the questions that will be dealt with today. So what's the common thread? We truly struggle to frame the challenge. We use the lens and techniques of the past to try to understand innovative things that are very different. This is not an uncool, stupid thing to do. It's a start. The real start is making judgment and stopping there or getting stuck. Sometimes you're reviewing something that's an improvement on an old search way or full text search way or retrieval way. And sometimes you're seeing a major, major platform shift. So if the common thread of search, even though it can look like an answer, that's not what's happening here. What's happening here is we're doing workflow integration. So you'll see this week that Microsoft has integrated AI into all of its stores, all of its coding courses, the Microsoft Office suite, and we can guarantee, and I can guarantee that you will see that through the entire Google Docs suite and all the tools that we live on as a guide on the side, or Microsoft trademarked theirs as a co-pilot. And when we have a co-pilot, we used to have co-pilots that were our teams and our colleagues. Now we're looking at, is this the co-pilot I need? The co-pilot in my real life is people who will say that's unethical or ask the tough questions. We are still at the level of artificial natural intelligence, not artificial general intelligence. ChatGPT knows most things faster and more completely than we do. What it doesn't have is insight. What it doesn't have is judgment yet. And whether artificial general intelligence is achieved in 4 years, 5 years, 20 years, we can pretty well guarantee it's coming. But what we don't know is artificial emotional intelligence arriving. Or are we going to see performative intelligence where someone can program into it politeness that are performative because the computer can't really be sorry, even though the ChatGPT response says it's sorry, I didn't understand. This is where we can be fooled into artificial emotional intelligence. Right now, some of the concerns is that when it gets attached, now that it's been attached to the web, that it can self-train itself and approach a singularity. That's something to debate, but it's also something to look at as we move towards this equity stuff. So, natural intelligence, is recall enough? Can it really be outsourced? I think most of us would agree that ChatGPT, when we play with it and use it as a guide on the side or a co-pilot, it's doing fine. And what is general intelligence, and what are the limits of artificial general intelligence? Some people say it's just like a human. Well, it's not. Artificial general intelligence is the ability of the bot to have judgment about what the correct answer is, but it doesn't move to emotional intelligence. Are we ever going to see real feelings? We know that Commander Data on Star Trek had his emotional intelligence turned off, and when he turned it on, he was overwhelmed. And the difference between performative intelligence, emotions, responses, and manipulative emotions, responses are very different. Manipulative isn't necessarily a bad thing. We, as teachers, we manipulate students into a learning paradigm where they do an experiment and get an aha moment. That is manipulative, and that is what we're doing. And then we need to look at what is human work. And when we have a guide on the side, can it reflect our values, our strengths, and our cultures? Can I tell ChatGPT to say, I want to see a definition of democracy in an Indian context, or an Australian context, or an American context? Those are three very different democracies, and understanding them requires an understanding of a lot of context. And those are interesting things. It doesn't mean that something is better than or worse than. It means they're just different things in the same apple crate. And then we need to have a stronger discussion of what does it mean to be human? And our libraries are full of these philosophical, psychological, sociological, very different suite of ideas about what it means to be human. And then when we start building in emotional intelligence, but saying, is intelligence related to belief? The world is a very multi-religious place. Belief does not need to be supported by facts. It is part of a belief system, not a scientific method. And when we become human and we have a belief system, no matter what our spirituality or religious frameworks are, it becomes very interesting of when I become, what does it mean to be human? And then what does it mean to be a bad human? What does it mean to be a good human? There are times when humans engage in revolution and it's a good thing. There are times when humans engage in attacks on the government where it's a bad thing. These are challenges, and we need to look at the spectrum, the scales of human behavior, and where do we want to regulate ChatGPT to be, and how do we ensure that it doesn't learn racism, sexism, anti-gender behaviors, a whole bunch of crap that's out there that's mostly unsupported by science or spirituality. And so my points to start our learning for this session is recognize when a tool is a major innovation, then evaluate them through the lens of what they try to be and what they may become. Second learning, consider the ethical and moral implications, but don't judge too soon on science fiction, fear, and speculation. The singularity may come, and knowing what it is helps, but a lot of people in our field love reading science fiction, and it's an interesting scenario. But it's interesting that during the Renaissance, the rethinking of the world, that revolution resulted in utopian fantasies, and our current revolution is more stalked by dystopian fantasies in our literature. Attempt to be part of the process. Your voice is important. How do we get librarians involved? How do we get multiple cultures involved? How do we get people who identify as different beings? How do we ensure that minorities are respected, even rather than the tyranny of democracy where the majority can trample people who do not deserve to be trampled, and it's immoral. So unlike understand that AI, especially ChatGPT, is not a search engine. Look further out to workflow as a co-pilot or a guide on the side. Play to understand. Go back to kindergarten and then judge in context, and know that one context is not enough. You may be making a decision for what works for your school board, your university, your healthcare institution, your organization. And you need to constantly remind yourself to say that the guardrails I am setting up, the pre-training I am organizing, is to serve this model. It may be that I want to cut a genome database on a racial characteristic in order to understand Tay-Sachs or some other genetic condition that pools in a certain racial population. That is not unethical. It's studying, it's sampling. However, if it's not there, then you're not being able to investigate. So look for what's not there. In the human genome database, there's a lot of stuff that's not there, despite its size. So last slide. Whom do you trust to regulate this? And these are open questions. I have my personal answers, but if you want, who do you trust to guide, regulate, and grow ethically? Your international organizations? Do we need a WIPO kind of model, an IFLA kind of model, a United Nations kind of model? What international organizations? What professions? What professions should be involved here? Librarians need to partner, not lead this. And frankly, there doesn't need to be a leader. There needs to be a facilitator. What governments? What governments are qualified to think this? Elections and appointments are not necessarily based on what they need to know to make a decision. What companies? Do we leave this up to OpenAI or Google or Facebook? What people? Is this a named expert kind of thing? Do we need the Jeff Hinton naysayers at the same time as we need the leaders who understand the stuff because they're developing it? And what group? Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.
I'll put these slides up on Stephen's Lighthouse for anybody who wants to look at them later.
Hey, thank you, Steve. Thank you for your exciting summary. It was really interesting. And one couple of things we have is like, what is the best practice to avoid to get the misleading information and how big facts and it brings to us when AI and chat tools like ChatGPT are open to general public on the internet. They will be, like you said, it is basically what it is. An AI tool, what you use is what it has been trained behind. So it could be trained behind, and different countries might have a different information that it gets trained, different scenarios, different stuff. But in general, how do you guide people, say, hey, you use ChatGPT or any tool like ChatGPT to get some information? How do you say, hey, what to avoid, what to not avoid? How do you fully rely on it?
Well, so let's use a metaphor. When I was first building some of the first full text databases at my employers, people would say they'll never convert everything. Well, we're pretty far along that space now. And so it took us 20 years, more than actually 40 years, to convert a significant corpus of information. It's not all converted to the same standard. It's not all neat and tidy, but AI could possibly move that along. So I'm saying that when we look at ChatGPT and see it, and it's 6 months old, for pity's sake, it's not even been weaned yet. It's an infant. We can't say it's a bad accountant, even though it can pass a law school exam. But we can look at it and say, this is missing. Who worldwide is going to say we need more subcontinent genome in the human genome database? We need a better organization of languages, because languages reflect culture. We need art that isn't just the mainstream art galleries. Those are opportunities for people who understand curation and collection development, that we can take our best practices and reframe them for the challenge of the creation of AGI.
Thank you, Steve. You mentioned about the personal voice, and you mentioned about the cloning of the personal voice. For me, it sounds like someone will call my family and say, I have lost my wallet. Please send me the cash right now through online system. So what happens to my clone voice, and what happens to my family? What happens to my wealth that is not visible to anyone, or zero wealth, whatever is there is going to go public and I will be lost. How do you see this risk to the common man's life?
Well, I think this is what Yusuf is going to talk about, but I think there's opportunities in the work we've done so far on federated identity management and moving beyond the password, and some of the work Google's done in that area, where it's beachheading some of the post two-factor authentication things. So many of us need to be forced, and I'm using the word forced, into an identity management framework that may be a bit of a hill to climb, but it's essential, like we fill out forms at banks, to ensuring the stability of our economic system, our banking systems, our commercial payment systems, and how we handle digital currencies and that sort of stuff, whether it's Bitcoin or whether it's just your regular dollars in your bank account. Like we don't print all the money anymore. It's been digital before Bitcoin came along and cryptocurrencies. So when we look at what needs to be there, it's a constellation of best practices that we need to move into the consumer space of normal people, not just in the gatekeeper roles of banking institutions or people guarding the marks at a university or your personal health record. There are some real challenges that have not been solved yet, but we're humans and we can have the brains to figure it out and then evolve it, because we're not going to get it right the first time.
By personal voice, I meant to bring the topic of Apple, which has now initiated a personal voice software where people can clone their voice and help people who need help in terms of disability, but in terms of exploiting the capabilities and abilities of good people or people who don't need that kind of a tool, that is the risk I'm referring to.
So those are the opportunities that with every invention, it's two sides of one coin. It can be used for good. So people who have no voice can have a voice. We can have our voice right now. You can buy apps that translate you speaking one language and it translates it into your voice speaking another language. So that's magic to me. And so that can give people voice who don't have voice because they don't speak a certain language and they can communicate with others. It also creates the opportunity for bad actors to do things. So we're used to seeing watermarks on pictures, and that is being adopted fairly rapidly in the AI image space. What does a watermark look like on your own voice? And this is why there's a writer's strike in Hollywood right now, because they're scared to death that the stealth corporation in Indonesia and the Philippines to create scripts and movies using AI will destroy their jobs. Now, can those stealth companies create something that lifts itself up into an Academy Award winner? We don't know, but I don't think so. I don't know if you can reach that level of writing something that speaks to your heart and your mind. And empathy is about speaking to the heart at the same time as meeting the mind's goals. And that's a challenge over time. Now we have to let it evolve, but we don't have to let it evolve the way we don't let 2-year-olds cross the street alone. We guide them. And how do we ensure that these nifty new technologies that allow my voice to read something in text and have inflection, correct inflection, it is amazing. But it also could, for the less savvy user, really hurt an individual or an election or a court case.
Thanks, Steve. I'll take a minute for the slide that I didn't bring up in the welcome words in this opening session. Just a minute, please. Sorry, the idea was to bring up the slide which is relating to the resolution that was passed last year with our conference in November to have an annual celebration of Equity Empathy Awareness Week. And this week is going to be celebrated in coming November on 13th to 19th. That was one announcement that I didn't make in the beginning. And the other announcement is we are having a series of webinars and forum meetings. The one next will be in July or August. It's on the trauma and how trauma can be combined with empathy and equity as a possibility of dealing with trauma in life scenarios. And the next conference will be in November, on November 13th or 15th of November, coinciding with the annual Awareness Week program. And that announcement is going to be sent out in a minute after the meeting after this meeting. We'll send out the details of the programs that are coming up. And I have my colleague from SEED board membership, Mr. Dr. Kishore. Dr. Kishore, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yeah, take your time, take a minute to tell about the new guide that is coming up.
Okay. Right now or at end of the program?
No.
Okay, fine. Greetings from India. I'm Kishore Satpathy. I'm from Indian Statistical Institute, Calcutta. Actually, we're in a process of finalizing a book entitled The Bridging of Empathy, Equity, and Diversity, Gap Through Inclusion and Belongingness. This is a guide that we are in a process of finalizing. I would like to request all my panel members if they can consider for writing 2-3 lines in advance as a recommendation for the book. What I'll be doing, I'll be sending the draft of the book to all of you in subsequent emails. Actually, the guide, the main aim of the guide is first to identify the gap, and the second is to set a plan to empower the people with empathy and equity, with a focus on digital empathy and digital compassion, humanity, and all inclusiveness, etc. And to reflect on the browsing of budgeting and surfing in other persons' shoes. It is based on the evidence that we have collected from different projects and activities around different communities to understand and to promote the better communication and clearer understanding of human at work. It is in line with the UN SDG agenda. And here we have focused on collaboration and awareness to action with a commitment to change the behavior. And we wanted to present all inclusiveness and building a culture of inclusion and belongingness. The guide is consisting of around 40 chapters, and 30 contributors are there across different disciplines and different parts of the countries around the globe. Plus, we have samples of content contributed by 50 plus organizations to supplement the main focus of the guide. It is going to be almost 500 pages of guide. But in short, the guide is going to provide ready-to-go informational resources that is based on the evidence-based best practices, as well as samples from the public campaign, how and where people have practicing these things around different parts of the country. So it is going to be a collective wisdom and for brand or campaign for different practitioners, or it also provides insight for the thought leaders. And best of all the above, the guide is going to present a roadmap and a strategy to move forward together, both in their reach and or outreach for their behavioral change. And the guide is going to be entitled is the guide to bridging the empathy, equity, and diversity gap through inclusion and belongingness. So I'll be sending, if you agree, I will be sending a draft sample of the guide to all of you in subsequent email, and I will request you to consider if you can go through that and you can give some kind of advance comment or recommendation of that, so that we can include it in the book, in the guide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kishore. The next speaker on our list is Dr. Claudia Plegari. Are you here, Dr. Claudia? Dr. Claudia? I don't hear your voice, Dr. Claudia. Are you there?
I don't see her on the list.
No? Do you see the list?
Yeah, I don't see the list. I don't see her in the participant list.
Okay. How about Dr. Akidi? Dr. Juliana Akidi, are you there? Dr. Juliana Akidi. So our next speaker will be Kelly Rowan. Kelly, are you there? Kelly?
Yes, I am here.
Okay, I'll share your screen. 1 second. Or do you have your PowerPoint? Can you do that? I have opened the screen sharing
no.
screen.
As long as I can, oops, I'm not going to use the web version. That never works out for me. Yeah, as long as I have permission to share the screen.
Yes. Go ahead.
Okay. Sharing here. All right. So you should be seeing my screen. Yes?
Yes, we do.
Okay, great. So yeah, diving into me right now is a complete topic change, but I was given 5 minutes. I have tried to time this. I'm kind of at 5.5 to 6 minutes, so I might be a little quick. It's very brief. So my presentation is looking at developing like an ethical foundation for community partnerships. And my research is specific into working with communities that have been historically marginalized. Specifically for me, working with tribal nations here in the US, and also with archives right now. We're with my co-author, writing a book that includes LGBTQ archives, and other marginalized, communities who have not had their voices front and center before. So historically, the way institutions, museums, archives, libraries have generally reached out to these communities has been to have their own idea, right? And to write the grant proposal, apply for it, get the money, and then go to the community of interest, right? With the money in hand and say, hey, we'd love to digitize, or do these oral histories, whatever, right? But this is not the way to lay the groundwork for an ethical partnership, right? Did this community even want this? Were they part of it? I know our department at Florida International University, we end up, people write grants, they get the money, and they're like, oh, and we'll need the library's help. And then they just add us on. Whereas we had nothing to do with the shaping of it. We don't have the time, the people, nobody wants you to just show up with money in hand, right? But this is historically the way we've approached communities. And this just continues the legacy of colonialism, right? And centers the institution's voice rather than the community's voice. So ideally, your community in your area will reach out to you. This has happened here at Florida. We've had Virginia Key Beach Park Trust reach out to us they're the first Black boots in Miami, and they wanted to host a wonderful collection, and that's great. But the reality, I think, for a lot of us working in these institutions is we find things in our archives, our community doesn't reach out to us, we need to reach out to them, right? So in doing that, I like to focus on the middle thing here, which is ask, and you can ask this through the whole process, right? What would be most beneficial for you when you're developing a relationship with a partner? Don't come at them with an idea and money in hand. Come to them with the thought of, what can we do that would benefit your community most? Before you do that, familiarize yourself with any cultural sensitivities before you just barrel in. We have a lot of people who call up like chiefs, chairpersons of tribal nations. They have no clue what's going on with the cultural heritage and the stuff. So figure out who you should be reaching out to. What are your own unconscious biases? Have the right terminology, right? Working with the tribe, I can't speak for all of the different tribal nations, but the ones I work with, don't call a meeting without food. Food is sacred. Food helps build community, it helps build relationships. So if you're coming to something without food, that's just not going to happen, right? So you want to be aware of these cultural sensitivities. Also, you need to be upfront with whatever restrictions your institution is facing. And I have heard from some of my fellow universities that their institution will not even consider repatriation of items that they might have from tribal nations, right? And that's unacceptable, I think, right? You can't reach out to a community when you're holding their stuff hostage and say you want to have a relationship with them and do something to support them. So be upfront with any institutional restrictions that you might have in building a partnership with a community, and then trying to host it and take care of it. Maybe you can't IP restrict things. Maybe once they give you something, you can never return it to them. Your community needs to know this up front before they get into a project with you. All right, I could title this slide Uncomfortable Thoughts, because as librarians and archivists, we want to share knowledge with everybody. We want it open, we want it accessible, and we want it there in perpetuity, right? And that's not going to be possible when you're dealing with some of these communities. If you can't do what I have on the right side of the screen, if you are not open to repatriating items of theirs you might have, or being able to restrict, like oral histories that are very personal, you have to remember a lot of these were collected in the 60s and 70s before people had any concept that the entire world would have access to it, right? So you have to be able to hide, you have to be able to remove items upon request, right? And some universities don't, some libraries don't, some museums don't see that as something they should do. But if we're going to break down, this legacy of colonialism and center the voices of our community, we need to be respectful. And if somebody says, it's the wrong time of year for us to tell this story, and yet you have it in your archive, it needs to be hidden, and we can't do that for them, then we're not being empathetic, we're not being respectful, we're not centering their voice and their needs. So other uncomfortable thoughts for librarians, like how much access can you give your community partner? Can they have full access to ingest their items, edit them, do the metadata, delete items? That's always like a really scary one. Like when I give permissions to interns, I never give them the ability to delete all items because it's terrifying. But we do want to give our community a chance to speak in their voice, right? So if they have the time and the ability to do the metadata, that's fantastic. If they don't, and you need to do it, then you probably need to think about working in small batches, getting the right thesaurus. There's all wonderful thesauri out there now, like the Homosaurus. If you're working with the LGBTQ community, be sure you have the right terminology, and then allowing your community to look it over, right, before you actually make it public. does content have the potential to be harmful spiritually or physically, right? So right now in Florida, you may have heard there are travel advisories for Black people, for LGBTQ people, and now for Latino people, right? So if we have an LGBTQ archive that maybe has personal names, now might be, maybe it's been up for 20 years, but now might be a time where I have to go back in and hide some of this content to protect people. So this is why being able to do these things is going to be so important. You also need to have guidelines for how your collection, and this is in the very beginning stage, you know, that first meeting, you need to develop rules for how, you know, when you retire, let's say, or you move on, that the next person doesn't say, oh, so they used to just remove items for you or repage. Well, we don't do that anymore. So you don't want that to happen to your community. Then they lose trust in you. So these are all things that need to happen in that very first communication stage. And I think I've probably reached my 5 minutes. So I just included a few resources that are wonderful. The UN has adopted the Sand Code of Ethics from an indigenous tribe in Botswana. As you know, and if you read through these and the Maori one, and then I just gave you an example, if you are reaching out or working with tribal nations, more and more of them now have IRB pages. And I just gave you an example of one, since I have a good friend and colleague from the Tana'atam Nation down in Southern Arizona. So I put theirs up, but you can search for IRBs from tribal nations. It's a little hit and miss, but they're all kind of starting to develop these. So if you're reaching out, and if they don't have one, you want to reach out to whoever is at a cultural heritage institution like an archive, library, museum for the tribe. And I know it's really brief, a brief starting point for, you know, developing really ethical foundations and working with your communities. But I'd love to hear from people. If you have any questions, here's my information. And these slides with those links, I will drop a copy of that in the chat for you now. That's it for me. Anybody have any questions?
Thank you, Kelly.
Looks like there are no questions. Now we have chance for Yusuf Mansouri to start the workshop, and we are running out of time, I think. Yusuf, are you there?
Yes, doctor, I'm here.
Please start your
So,
workshop.
yeah. So my version is a little bit big, but I'll try to be, in the interest of time, I'll try to be brief and probably skip some of the topics. Let me see if I can get that. Okay. Can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we
Yes.
can.
Okay. Okay. So today I'll be speaking about a very important topic called cybersecurity. So the first question is, what is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is the art of protecting networks, devices, and data from unauthorized access or criminal use, as well as the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. It seems that everything relies on computers and internet. For example, communication through emails, through smartphones, through tablets, entertainment through interactive video games, social media apps, transportation through navigation systems and autonomous vehicles, shopping through online shopping and credit cards, medicine through medical equipment, medical records, and the list goes on and on. We use a lot of technology in our daily life, and we need to protect it. So I'll try to break cybersecurity for simplicity in 4 key areas: cyber attacks, vulnerabilities, cyber controls, and cryptography. So it's easier to understand it in this if it's broken into this four parts. So why cybersecurity? A report from the Center of Strategic and International Studies shows a significant impact that cybercrime has on economies worldwide. It concludes that the cybercrime costs almost $445 billion worldwide, and with an impact of 200,000 jobs in US and 150,000 jobs in EU. The most important cost of a cybercrime comes from its damage to the company performance, as well as national economies. Cybercrime has many damages. So it damages trade, it damages competitiveness, it damages innovation and global economic growth. Internet economy is roughly between $2 and $3 trillion. And it's going to grow. Cybercrime extracts between 15 and 20% of the value created by the internet. Cybercrime effect on intellectual property, or IP, is particularly damaging. And countries where IP creation and IP-intensive industries are important for wealth creation lose much more trade and jobs and income from cybercrime than countries that depend on agriculture or industries of low-level manufacturing. The picture is equally bad in Australia. In Australia, we lose around $29 billion annually from cybercrime. The main victims are individuals, businesses, and government organizations. A third of the businesses in Australia have experienced a cybercrime. An average cost of a cybercrime is $250,000. It takes 23 days on average to resolve a cyber attack. And there is a significant impact on business, either for disruption or loss of information, or loss of revenue, or loss of productivity, equipment being damaged. So in order to mitigate these sorts of things, we first need to understand the motivation of the cyber attackers. Why do they do what they do? And then we will think about the mitigations. But what are the cyber attack motivations? So there are roughly 6 major motivations, and there's one internal motivation as well, but yeah. There are roughly 6 major motivations. So first one is cyber criminals. They do it for financial gains. They're a team of people who use technology to commit malicious activities with the intention of stealing sensitive company information or personal data to generate profit. Then there is corporate espionage. It's done for economic gains or competitive advantages. They steal classified information, intellectual property, or just disrupt the trade and operations of an organization to halt their progress, to slow them down, to get competitive advantage for their companies. Then you have hacktivists. It's like a form of civil disobedience to promote some social or political agenda. They attack sites to either make their voice heard or to promote awareness of their ideological causes. Then you have terrorists that create digital disruption, mainly to instill fear. Then you have national intelligence programs that are used for cyber espionage, for political or military purposes. Then you have got your disgruntled insiders. they want to seek revenge or they want to get some financial gains. And there's a seventh one as well, which I've not mentioned here, is the thrill seekers. They hack into the system just for the challenge or for the thrill of it. They don't do any real damage intentionally, but they end up doing unintentional damage. So let's see how these motivators attack, or what do they attack? So you have 5 types of cyber attacks that happen, 5 major groupings of cyber attack. There are lots of attacks within those groupings, but these are the major categories. So you have your network attacks, your software attacks, your social attacks, your internal attacks, and your physical attacks. And I'll go through each of them as I progress. So network attack, internally, there are many types of network attacks. So you have the distributed denial of service, where there is an explicit attempt by the perpetrator to disrupt legitimate online services by making them unavailable, typically by flooding your bandwidth or your resources so that your system becomes so slow or they crash. Also, the attacks are usually performed by compromised systems. So you wouldn't attack your target from your system. You will compromise a range of systems, and then you will use them as robots to attack a target system. And usually they are geographically dispersed so that IPs can be much easily forged. Then the second type of network attack is a man-in-the-middle attack, where the attacker secretly alters messages between 2 parties who believe that they're directly communicating with each other. The attacker makes independent connections between the victims and relays messages between them to make them believe that they're privately talking to each other, while the attacker controls the information flow. Each one has mitigations, but I think they're too technical to go through it. Then you have the botnet attacks. So where a network of robots, interconnected devices, compromised devices through malware, they perform different types of attacks. They might do denial of service attack, or they might send spam or malware, or they might steal data, or they might take control of your device. And there is a bot master who controls those bots using command and control software, and they can really bring down your system. Then you have DNS spoofing. So DNS is a domain name service that converts a name that you type on your, say, your web page to an IP address, because machines don't understand names, they understand addresses. So just like our phone book in our telephones. So there is a way to spoof that database. Typically, if you want to get a number of a particular name, like CNN.com or whatever name converts to a number, usually you would ask your upstream domain name server for that resolution. And then you cache it for future resolution. So you don't have to connect to the upstream name server every time you need it. There are ways to provide incorrect resolution data, to corrupt your DNS resolver cache data. When the DNS returns incorrect results, so basically it would return a different IP address for the same name, which means your computers will now connect to a different machine, which usually will be an attacker site or a malicious site. And then that malicious site would act like a legitimate site, and then users will be tricked into accepting content or even downloading malware. Then there are many other network attacks as well, but these are the major ones. Then you have system attacks. So farming is a system equivalent to a DNS spoofing attack, where instead of the upstream DNS sending you corrupted data, your system resolution cache is corrupted, or your host file or a resolver is corrupted, and it does the same thing. It takes you to a different machine, and you are tricked into accepting content or downloading malware from that site. Then you have your typical malware software that's designed to harm the system, the network, the data. And there are many types of malware. There is the worms, there is Trojans, there is ransomware, there is virus, there is a spyware. But they all typically used to steal your sensitive data or hold your computer to ransom, or they can be even used to compromise your computer, which in turn attacks other systems. So your computer becomes a bot or a robot, and it can be used as part of the bot network. Now we'll talk about the malware, various malwares, like what's a worm, Trojan, ransomware, etc. So worm is a standalone malware that replicates itself to computers near you. It uses the vulnerabilities of your systems to spread and infect other computers. And typically it goes recursive, so it replicates very fast in a short period of time. But it really does not do like real damage. So it causes harm. It consumes your network bandwidth and some CPU cycles. And in some case, it might even install some backdoors for future exploitation. Then you have a Trojan. Trojan is something that looks like a legitimate software, but it is actually there to steal your data or damage your computer. Usually it's spread by social engineering, such as downloading an executable file or forms. And it also consumes your network bandwidth, CPU cycles, and it installs backdoors or generates vulnerabilities for exploitation by other malware in the future. Ransomware threats to publish, it threatens you to publish your private data, or it also blocks access to your private data until a ransom is paid. It's also called a crypto-viral extortion. Since the victim's private data is so your data will still stay on your machine, but it will be encrypted. And they will charge you to decrypt your data. Ransom is typically demanded in Bitcoin or other currencies that are quite difficult to track and prosecute. You also have your traditional virus, which is a malicious software that replicates itself by altering other programs. So it deletes, your main program, and then you cannot restart your system. It requires a host program, so it alters the host program by inserting its own code causing infection and damage to the system and its data. The largest amount of damage that's been done in the computer world is through viruses, because they maximize the damage by service disruption, they waste resources, they corrupt data, they steal data, and so on. There are a few tiny ones like SQL injection. Typically, if the code is sloppy, then it is possible to inject some extra code to change the course of the execution of the software. So when an application sends unverified data to the database, it can have unexpected consequences, such as exposure of your data or modification or deletion of your data. A lot of websites, defacement of websites that you see, especially the content-driven ones, have been defaced using SQL injection if proper controls have not been in place. Sometimes SQL injection can also use to uplift the administrative privileges first, and then you exploit the administrative privileges to then open doors for other vulnerabilities and malware. Then you have your spyware, which is designed to gather personal information from user computer and forward it to a third party without any consent. Sometimes spywares are found in legitimate software, and they're used for monitoring user data for commercial purposes, sometimes for advertising, monitoring, tracking. So by forwarding user and system data, the spyware violates privacy and system security. Nowadays, the free software, they have this condition where they say, you can use this software for free, but then we will use your data for free as well. So sometimes it's a symbiotic relationship. You get a free use of software, and they monitor your activities, and they use it for improving their future products and so on. And finally, you have cross-site scripting. It's usually a vulnerability found on websites, but it affects the users such that it allows hackers to bypass access controls. So the hacker will inject a malicious code in the trusted website, and the user connects to that website knowing that this is a trusted website and I don't really even need to provide any user ID password. But that session, the whole session is hacked through that malicious code, and all user data and even the information and activities between the user and the website is all forwarded to the hacker. Usually these things happen because of sloppy code. So as long as the code is solid, all inputs are validated and application firewalls are in place, it can be mitigated. The next type of attacks are social attacks. They broadly all go into one, which is called the phishing attack. So it's a social engineering attack used to steal user data, such as login information or credit card numbers. So here the attacker masquerades as a trusted entity, such as a bank or utilities or tax or government service agent, and dupes the victim into opening their email or banking app and revealing sensitive information. Then if the phishing attack is targeted, then it's called spear phishing. There's a new term I just found out recently is if you are targeting a very high value target, then they call it whaling because of the size of it. There is a phishing attack, which is phishing through voice calls, and there is smishing attack, which is phishing through SMS. But they're very, very common now. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I experienced it. So typically our tax returns happen at every quarter, and we get emails about our tax returns saying, as company tax, you pay that. And I got an SMS with the same information. And there was a link. I was on my phone, so I just clicked on the link, and it took me to the login page of the tax office. The name looked very genuine. It was very, very close. And I tried to log in. And then I found out that tax office never sends you an SMS. So it was most probably a phishing attack. Then you have your internal attacks. So typically it will be unauthorized access, where internal users often have valid access to systems and may have the capabilities to bypass internal controls and may end up performing unauthorized activities. Internal users have done most damage to the organization, system, and data. Sometimes accidental, sometimes malicious. You also have the data breach, where confidential information is either released intentionally or unintentionally. Sometimes information exposure is due to data leak through the theft of laptops or theft of USBs or careless disposal of disk storage, etc. It does have huge implications. It causes reputational damage and has legal and financial implications. Then you have the physical attacks. And physical attacks have been happening for a very, very long time. I presume for centuries, they have been happening. So eavesdropping, so unauthorized listening to conversations, reading the documents or messages, intercepting communications, whether it's audio or video. You have role playing, where a role player impersonates somebody else. So intruder may impersonate a utility worker, such as an electrician or a plumber or a construction worker, that could be easily trusted to enter the sensitive premises. And then the intruder may steal or access sensitive information or asset. Sometimes they don't even look for information. They just pick a laptop and run away. And they worry about accessing the information later on. Then there is something called tailgating, where an unauthorized person enters a restricted area by tailgating an authorized person who has access. The intruder may make fake actions of swiping the access card, and they might steal or access sensitive information. Then you have dumpster diving, where the intruder searches for sensitive information in companies' dustbins. It could be discarded papers, USBs, CDs, or sticky notes. They can access the information like personal information or bills or system information, or even trade secrets if they are carelessly disposed. So we talked about the first topic, which is attacks. Now we'll look at the vulnerabilities. Dr. Tahir, you can stop me whenever you feel like we have reached the time limit.
If you are touching the human side, please go ahead. This is the human side that is required for IT and cyber security of these common people.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. So now we'll talk about vulnerabilities. So we talked about attacks, so we need to deal with the attacks in a certain way. At the same time, we need to understand what are our vulnerabilities. So what do we need to fix? So you have vulnerabilities, there are flaws in computer system that weaken the overall security of the device, but it could be policy-based vulnerability as well. So you might have non-existent or incomplete set of security policies and procedures. So people don't know how to, there are no standard operating procedures. So people don't know how to deal with information and keep it safe. Then you could have hardware-based vulnerabilities, and then you have software and application-based security vulnerabilities. So definitely policies and procedures, a lack of it can result into theft and damage. And the people who are handling it won't even know what mistakes they have made because they have not been trained. There's reputational loss, legal and financial implications. So it's very important that policy procedure guide employees on what to do and what not to do. Then you have your hardware vulnerabilities where hackers might exploit your physical or system weaknesses, and they might gain access from your hard disks or your storage, CD or flash drive or terminal ports, your unpatched systems, your out-of-date BIOS or device drivers, or your system's memory or storage, and etc. Software, again, if it's sloppy and not written properly, especially if software is not patched, it's legacy, if the security controls like weak passwords, weak access controls. And there's something called the 0-day exploit, in the sense that whenever there is a bug, the software companies notify everyone saying, unfortunately, there's a bug in our software. Please patch it. Now, the side effect of that, the bad effect of that is hackers know about that bug as well. And they look for software that have not actually patched it. So they call it the 0-day. So the day they realize that there is a bug, they use it on various sites to see if it's not been patched. Sometimes they inject malware on those for future use. The third part of this cybersecurity is controls. So you know what the attacks are or threats are. You know what the vulnerabilities there are. Now, what controls do we need to apply? Controls, typically, you have 5 things you do. You prevent, you detect, you ensure there are policies and procedures, you recover from it, and then you provide your awareness and training. So we typically in Australia, we follow the Essential 8, which is Australian government's mitigation of cybersecurity incidents from the Australian Cybersecurity Centre, which allows assist organization protecting their systems against a range of adversaries. So there is application whitelisting, where only the whitelisted applications can execute. There's a patching that gets done to stop applications from executing malicious code. Microsoft Office macro settings, application hardening, so Flash, ads, Java, and those sorts of vulnerabilities are hardened. Accounts do not get easy admin privileges. Operating systems are patched. There is multi-factor authentication. And I think Stephen talked about different identity and access management or digital identity and so on. So multi-factor used to be like what you have and what you know. So you have a user ID and password. You know your user ID and password, and what you have is a biometric. Now, unfortunately, with artificial intelligence, the biometric can be replicated as well. So I guess we'll have to go for another level of authentication. I think Dr. Tahir talked about voice being cloned, which then asks for money. But typically it's a transaction, so it has to be negotiated. So it's not a monologue, where you send voice and say, I need money, I've lost my wallet. No, the other person will actually talk to you and say, where did you lose it? Are you hurt? And it will go into a more conversational dialogue. And hopefully that could identify that this is a robot talking to you, or this is your kid talking to you. But I'm sure there's a lot of work happening in that area. And then finally, the daily backup. So this is Essential 8 from Australian government, and it mitigates a lot of cyber attacks. This is a little bit more details about prevention. Same thing. Then you have detection. So you look at logs to see malicious attempts. in your domain name system logs, or your email server logs, or your operating system logs, or your security and appliance log, your virtual private and remote access logs, your web proxy logs, your intrusion detection and prevention policy logs. Also, you also do checks on your insiders as well, saying, is somebody rapidly and copying lots of files or making lots of changes or trying to access unauthorized USBs or storages? Somebody's trying to use the system outside business hours. Or if your data access or printing access is much more excessive compared to what you normally do, and so on. So there are ways to detect. And then, of course, the policies and procedures. So you need to define the systems and data assets that need protection. You need to mitigate threats to those assets, and you have to implement rules and controls to protect them. Typically, when you are talking about controls for policies and procedures, it's about your accounts and passwords and whether it's multi-factor and your account expiry cycle and so on. There will be things about emails and communications. How do you handle sensitive data? How do you handle technology? How do you handle social media and internet access? And finally, recovery. So recovery is very, very, very important. This process needs to be really, really sorted out for an organization. So this is where you identify and assess. So find what was the initial cause of the incident. You identify the damage and assess the business impact from the damage. You isolate the system to contain the damage. Then you respond. So you remove the threat. You restore the system from backups. And then you restore. So you review the weaknesses in the processes. You update the incident response plan from the lessons learned. And then you report to the government cybersecurity authorities for investigating. This is post cybercrime. And then there is a security awareness part. So they say that if you are properly trained, you reduce the risk of socially engineered cybersecurity threats by 70%. And there are awareness programs that you need to do. This is not a cybersecurity, but this is more about how can you be safe on the public internet and still work in a business as usual manner. So if you were to do that, you want to be cyber secure, then cryptography is one standard way of doing that. Cryptography consists of protocols to provide secure communication over public networks. It prevents the public from reading your private messages while maintaining the privacy, confidentiality, integrity, and non-repudiation of your messages. Typically, it uses encryption. So you encrypt the readable information into gibberish, which is unreadable. You transport it across public network to the legitimate recipient. And then the recipient can decrypt it and make it into readable information. Modern encryption is based on mathematical theory and computer science practice. And I think it's moving beyond that now to quantum computing and so on. So typically the encryption is based on mathematics. There are cryptographic algorithms that are based on computational hardness assumptions. So no encryption is 100% safe, but they have hardness. So how long does it take to hack it or decrypt it using brute force? And the idea is that the longer it takes to break that information, the less valuable that information becomes. So it's about hardness. or they call it computationally secure. And then there is encryption standards. So an advanced encryption standard, if you were to use 128-bit keys using brute force, it will take 1 billion years. So by that time, the data would be useless. And there are different types of keys. There is a symmetric key and asymmetric key. So symmetric key is where the sender and receiver has the same type of key, and the ciphers that are from that is 3 types, mainly the block cipher, the stream cipher, and the hash cipher. I mean, they're self-explanatory. So for example, the block cipher encrypts a block of data at a time, and it uses data encryption, DS, and advanced this AES. They use this type of block cipher. The second type of symmetric key uses a character cipher. This was used, is similar to the one-time pad used in World War II. So it encrypts 1 character at a time. Then you have the hash cipher, where the messages are encrypted in a fixed length hash. Because in olden times, if you were to use a character or a block cipher, people could actually find out saying, okay, I'm getting only two characters very frequently. That means it is to or in or off, and they could guess things. So here, regardless of how many characters you encrypt, it generates a fixed length hash. And examples are MD5 and SHA uses that. Then you have the asymmetric or the public key. So here there is a key pair, so public key and private key. They are related, but a private key cannot be derived from public key. The public key is distributed to everyone, and the private key is kept secret. Public key is used to encrypt data, and private key is used to decrypt data. There are 2 key functions. There is a PKI infrastructure or data encryption infrastructure, and then there is a digital signature infrastructure. This both uses the asymmetric key. So your public key, the sender encrypts data with the recipient's public key and sends it. That means only the recipient's private key can open that, decrypt that data. Hackers cannot encrypt it because they have no means to decrypt. They can see the encrypted data, but they cannot decrypt it. And the files get transferred safely. The same public key is used, but in the exactly opposite way. So it becomes a digital signature. So here the sender signs a document with his private key and transfer it across the public network. The recipient can check the validity of the signature using the sender's public key. So they know that this signature can only be created by a sender who has a private key for which the public key is available. So again, the hacker cannot do much about it. So that concludes the cybersecurity presentation. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Pansari, for this one and for your experience. And your presentation, it was really good. It was more in detail. And the SMS attacks you shared with for your tax fund, this happens in the US all the time. It is like an everyday thing for everyone. We get like many messages every day.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And they have links to websites, you know. It's not a pure SMS message. It's like an MMS message. So
and the thing with that is, like, if it comes through an email, you can actually go back and see, hey, this is a genuine sender, and you can look at it. But in an MMS message, you can't actually see what is behind that fictitious link that you see on the screen.
Yeah.
And the
With
way they
email,
have
yeah, go ahead.
and the way they have done nowadays is that sometimes these messages are from telephone numbers that you think that you know them and that is around you in your local area.
Yeah. See, with email, there is antivirus. Okay. So, and spam, anti-spam and so on. Like if you are subscribed to Outlook or Google, you know, they take care of that bit. So because they see how many, there is like a huge amount of message sent to many people, they have a visibility on that bulk distribution. But unfortunately, with SMSs, there's no protection. The telephone company is not saying, "Hey, this looks like a spam." There's no firewalls or anything to protect you. So that's a big issue.
And
I think
I'm
at
not
some stage, yeah.
and,
Yeah,
and
go
I'm
ahead.
not sure about in Australia how it is, but in the United States, what we have is we can basically send that as a block sender, and we can basically send that as a fictitious MMS or SMS.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
not seeing any new questions for you. And thank you for your effort. And it was really good. Really informative.
Thank you. Any questions, Dr. Tahir?
Yeah, I have the human touch to say, what is my empathy status in the whole scenario, empathy or equity kind of scenario? How do we balance the missing components of the human components of the, even in artificial intelligence, other than artificial, what is natural intelligence doing about empathy, equity, and helping the have-nots?
Well, I mean, I have worked on something like that before, and every country has this issue, not just with AI, but just with technology itself. So in Australia, we have rural, remote, indigenous, and there is a digital exclusion at the moment. Okay, either they're not educated well enough, or they're not rich enough, or they do not have the bandwidth or the connectivity. So there's a lot of digital exclusion happening. And there are programs by Australian government. They call them digital inclusion programs, where no child is left digitally behind. So there's a lot of work happening. They have seen the impact of it. When the kids are not participating, there are huge impacts, whether they are employment or social, health, homelessness, abuse of substance, a huge impact. So they are looking at the digital inclusion in Australia and in other countries as well. That I worked with the Ministry of Communication and IT in Saudi Arabia recently, and we had a huge program on digital inclusion as well. So I guess it's very, very important, and it becomes even more important where the level of intelligence you require now is more with these new technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning and natural language processing, cognition. There will be digital inclusion. They call it fourth generation technology. So I guess the ones that are digitally included, they may not include it in the fourth generation digital inclusion. So it's hard to catch up, but it's somebody has to think about it.
Thank you, Yusuf. You have given us very good insight of the threats, of the vulnerabilities, and the impossibilities of these kind of things that are going on and on and on since ages. Thank you.
Thank you.
So friends, we had very good session here with Steve Abraham giving us insights of the technology of the artificial intelligence and insights of what people should be doing or the government should be doing. That was very good educational session for me from Stephen Abraham's presentation. I learned many things from Kelly's presentation on community involvement, on community engagement, and community partnership, which is equally important in libraries, archives, museums, and social activities, where the partners do understand each other. And the word that she used in the presentation is sensitivity. 5 chapters in the coming guide deal with sensitivity of dealing with human relationship, sensitivity in dealing with kind of machines that are there and how to deal with them sensitively. 5 chapters that deal with training people to be sensitive, training people to be acquainted with the machine and with the other vulnerabilities in the society. So the guide is going to add to what Kelly has just highlighted. Thank you, Kelly, for bringing up the sensitivities of interactions in the digital age. And I have no words to thank to the chief opening session of Yusuf Mansouri and his wind up with the cybersecurity threats. He has spent his time, so much of time, and he has been empathetic with my last minute call to do this opening session and the last minute call to do the last presentation he did today. Thank you very much, Yusuf, and I hope you are fine and well with the Australian hacking and tracking movement. I find only Australia does the cybersecurity annual awareness week, cyber threats. That's nowhere popular in the globe. I don't know how other countries miss that opportunity of awareness week being conducted for cybersecurity. And all over Australia, it is involved in engaging people in different sectors, not just cyber world, but even economic, education, and everyone is engaged and involved. Thank you, Australia, for this kind of lead in cybersecurity for the Awareness Week program.
Yes, thank you.
Any questions from the audience about the seed programs, about this present session? Any questions from the audience? No questions? We'll be uploading this recording on YouTube in a day or so. The moment we finish editing a little bit, we'll upload it on YouTube and you'll have access to this recording. And that has been a question from someone who is asking when will the recording be available. Okay. Thank you for reminding us.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, friends, for being a supportive movement for this unboxing of inequities, unboxing of the empathy kind of a gap in the society. Let's keep on the conversation and keep the word spreading everywhere that we need more empathy, we need more compassion, digital empathy, digital compassion, and every type of empathy and every type of compassion to solve the problems of the have-nots, the digital exclusions that Yusuf just mentioned now. Digital exclusion has so many varies and so many layers that cannot be counted in few seconds, but he has highlighted the most important. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day and good night for the Australian world.
Yes.
Take care.
It's 2 a.m. Yeah. See you. Bye-bye.
Bye.